but I guess, just for our listeners, before we get into some of your work, perhaps give an introduction to how, you became the founder of the Inner Mammal Institute, and what does that mean, and if you can give us some of that background.
Okay. The Inner Mammal Institute is a resource for information on how you can rewire your brain to stimulate more happy brain chemicals. The impulse behind it is I was always interested in understanding my neurochemical ups and downs like everyone else. Also, as a parent and a teacher, I saw the results of my current ways of thinking on the people around me, and I felt that it wasn't working. So I read everything I could, and a lot of things I read had small references to animal neurochemistry and the animal brain. And my experience was you would always find small bits of information, but no one connected the dots. Right. Because if you connect the dots, they lead to a message that makes people uncomfortable, which is that animals are not happy all the time. They compete, they fight. They sometimes steal food from children. They kill each other. And this has become taboo. Many of the leaders in animal research were in the UK, and frankly, people were accused of being Nazis for holding this perspective. And so 50 years of research was lost. And needless to say, I'm not advocating that we're at each other's throats and we're competing and we're hostile, but it's that it takes a tremendous effort to be happy with the brain we've inherited. Okay, you can't just let go and be natural and expect that that's going to work.
Yeah. And I think the important message there is that, it's almost a bit obnoxious of us to think that we're different to other animals, and to we completely see ourselves as we're humans, we're smarter, we're separate. But in fact, if you look at the evolutionary cycle and the pattern, I mean, you mentioned David Attenborough as one of your someone that
my hero. Yes.
That you regard in the highest regard, and I love the when he talks about evolution and he displays it. But for us to think that we're anything different than animals, and for therefore to not have similarities in the way that we think and the way that we react, it's
Well, here's the thing. The core of our brain is inherited from animals, but then we have added a lot on. And what we've added on is not the neurochemical emotional part, but it's an information processing apparatus. So we can take more information into account so we can anticipate the long run consequences of our actions. So we're sort of trying to steer with two different operating systems. Yeah. But the other complication is what you say, of course, yes, we are part of the animal world, but the current trend in thinking in academia is to redefine animals and to say that animals are altruistic and empathetic. And in order to do that, they're constructing artificial laboratory situations. It's true that animals cooperate, but they do that only when they're getting a short-run benefit out of it. Mm-hmm. And the idea that animals are altruistic is only true if you take a setting grossly out of context. And I'll give you an amazing example. I give zoo tours, and I'll be giving some in the UK, which I'd be happy to do with you. So at the zoo, they feed the alpha animal, and he gives the food to the other individuals. If they gave the food directly to other individuals, the alpha chimp would attack them and injure them, attack them seriously. Yeah. And so what appears altruism, that he's distributing the food, is really a sort of a dictatorial behavior that we've worked very hard to transcend. The guy in charge gets all the food and then he gives us some if we kowtow. Mm-hmm. That's the animal way that is uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, the important thing is that if that's where the evidence has taken you, that's what's observed. Yeah. So the rest of the sort of mainstream communities, are they perhaps unhappy with those findings, that it goes against what they hope to found in those artificial situations that they've set up?
Yes, but when you say mainstream, just to make sure we're using it in the same way, because when people who consider themselves progressives say mainstream, they mean conservatives, but I'm talking about progressives, okay? I'm talking about the people in academia who are currently in power, who got to power by doing real research on the truth, and then once they got into power, they're changing their positions because they're trying to say things that they think sound nice.
Okay.
And I want to be nice too. But when the nice doesn't work, I tried this on my own kids and it didn't work. The old way. The old way is, I want to be nice. I'll give you the carrot whether you've earned the carrot or not, and I never want to give you the stick or any kind of negative reinforcement because I want to be nice.
Yeah.
But your brain then learns, hey, I can do nothing, and carrots will just fall into my lap. And when the world doesn't work that way, then you're miserable.
Right. I went to the frequently asked questions section on your website, and I really loved it because it touched immediately upon the subject of happiness. And as you scroll down, it begins, the happiness of self. And then later on, social happiness, and I guess the value in being happy with others and helping others. And I thought that was a great place to start, in combination with, perhaps a brief description of the happy chemicals and then the cortisol. And I think because, even at a very high level, that for me, that was quite a profound lesson.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Again, it's not what I expected when I started out, but I just kept stumbling on it. So, okay, let's start with dopamine. That's the happy chemical that we associate most with the feeling of excitement that we want to have. And we often know it comes and goes, and it's hard to figure out why. And my books explain as much of not just what turns them on, but then why they droop, because that's so much part of our life frustration. So dopamine is the feeling that you're approaching a reward. I could give hundreds of examples, but my book has them. In the interest of time, you define reward in the context of your individual life experience of whatever turned on your dopamine in the past. So partly you could say, if you got a cookie when you were young, your brain said, wow, this is good. And then it's like, how can I get a cookie? If your mother said, oh, broccoli is delicious, and got excited about broccoli, you may have learned to have perceived broccoli as a reward. But then when you would have tasted a cookie, you would have said, wow, this is better.
Yeah.
So we are always partly motivated responding to the reality of our inner mammal and to the circuits that we built in the past, mostly the circuits of our early experience, because those are the circuits that got myelinated, which we could talk about later. Now, the reason dopamine droops is because our brain quickly habituates. The simple example would be if you were walking through the desert, then nothing would make you more happy than water. But the minute you've had enough water, it doesn't make you happy anymore. So your brain is very careful about only releasing dopamine when you meet a need. However, you have defined needs. So if you get a smile from that person that you just got to have, then that's a reward that meets a need. But, a day later, that person may not do it for you, and then that smile won't work, okay? So, but to make life harder, your brain also habituates so that as soon as there's no new information, your dopamine stops. And the classic sad example is a person who's obsessed with a video game. I gotta get it, I gotta get it, I gotta get it. So that's a way to stimulate it without all the frustration of the real world. But that gets old. So that's why there's always a new level. So the idea of a new level is sort of what works with our dopamine, because we always get tired of our old level, whatever our old level is. Okay. Now, the next happy chemical, I'll talk about endorphin, because that's the one that was discovered first, and that's the one that we hear most about with the endorphin high or runner's high. And I was shocked to learn that endorphin is only released when you're in pain. So it's not this euphoria thing of like, I'm going to hang out and be happy. No, your brain only releases it when you're in physical pain, not social pain. The classic example, going back to David Attenborough and the shot of the lion gets the zebra and gores the zebra with flesh hanging out, and yet the zebra is able to run and save itself. And the reason is that endorphin masks pain for 20 minutes so you could do what it takes to survive. So if you were a caveman and you broke your leg when you fell in a hole, endorphin would mask pain so that you could climb out of the hole and call for help. Yeah. But then after 20 minutes, the endorphin stops and you feel the pain because that's nature's signal that your injuries need protecting. And that's why we are not designed to hang out on endorphin all the time. And no animal is hanging out on endorphin all the time. And when I say endorphin, of course, I mean morphine, heroin, oxycodone, codeine, etc. Paracetamol with codeine, whatever. So that's why, we can't live for endorphin. And a person with runner's high, if you do the same run every day, you do not get high. You only get it if you run past your limits. And if you do that every day, you're going to end up injured. Yeah. So endorphin is something I think it's nice to know that we have it for emergencies, but to not expect that as a daily thing. So moving on, let's talk about oxytocin. So oxytocin is not as much, was not in the news in the past, but suddenly it has a cult following. So oxytocin is called the bonding hormone or the love hormone or the cuddle hormone, and has been very much studied in the context of feeling good about those you're with. So I call it trust. So when you have a sense of trust with those you're with, then you can lower your guard, and that's the state that mammals evolved to live in. So most mammals live in groups. They're constantly alert for predators, but when you're surrounded by a group, you can lower your guard because the other eyes and ears are sharing that alertness for predators. So then you feel more relaxed. So say I'm a gazelle and I see some nice green juicy grass over there on a hillside. If I leave to go for that grass, then I'm leaving my herd, my oxytocin falls, and I'm going to start feeling endangered. And that's how a baby gazelle who doesn't understand the risk of predators learns to stick with social support even when it's too young to understand. And in fact, no animal can really fully understand predator threat, because once you're in the jaws of a predator, then it's too late. Yep. So oxytocin is what trains us to feel safe when we're near others and to feel unsafe when we go off to that juicy grass on the on the next hill. Yeah. So when I stick with the herd, then when I eat the grass, I'm just getting brown grass, and I'm getting lots of other guys' horns are sticking me, and I would much rather be by myself on that green, juicy hillside by myself. And so that's why we constantly have this pull and conflict, and it's real. It's not like something went wrong. This is what it means to be a mammal.
And I think, again, another important point is that, we shouldn't be focused on trying to get rid of one or try and make the other one stronger. It's just understand that we do need both, and both of these tools have evolved through time.
Yes.
Because we absolutely needed them. One part needs to be alert and aware. Is there going to be a snake or a spider or a lion or a tiger coming to get me? But yet on the other side, we also want the pleasure. We want the pleasure aspect of it. So it's finding that balance. And once you understand, this is why that happens and this is why that happens.
Yeah.
Then it's about managing it. And then
yeah.
And then that's really when the game of life begins, because it's about managing those two sides.
Yeah. Well, and it's not managing pleasure versus pain, but it's managing this pleasure versus that pleasure. Because as I go toward the greener pasture, I lose the safety of the group. As I go toward the safety of the group, I lose the greener pasture.
Yeah.
And all I say to myself is I can celebrate that I have that choice to make. Because in so many life circumstances, you don't have the choice. But once people have the choice, doesn't make them happy. It just makes them angry because they're like, why can't I have both at the same time? So it's to understand that this is a new luxury that we've evolved to have that choice, and we have to balance it. But I need to talk about the last neurochemical because that's the hardest one.
Sure.
So that's serotonin, and serotonin is the one that we hear about in the context of antidepressants, Prozac, serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So like aspirin, antidepressants were discovered by accident. No one understood why it worked, but it just works. So what does serotonin do that is relevant? Well, most of your serotonin is in your stomach. Isn't that mind-blowing? So the part of it that's in your brain, what does it do that's related to depression? So there's all this academic research, but in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there was research that showed that when an animal dominated the animal next to it, that it got the food and it had an increase in serotonin. When it could not dominate, then its serotonin went down. This is mind-blowing because it makes so much sense that when there's a bit of food, if I say, hey, I'm bigger than you, I'm going to get the food, my serotonin motivates me to feel safe, to go toward the food without worrying about you biting me or goring me.
Yeah.
And it also prepares me to digest it because the serotonin is in my stomach. So it's
would
amazing.
it be true to say that the chimp example that you gave of the alpha chimp that got fed first,
Yeah.
would he have more serotonin than the other members of than the other chimps? Because
I think that he does, and that's why I think this research disappeared, because it's so controversial. It appears to encourage people to be a dictator. And obviously that is not at all what I'm saying. You know, I researched this so that my son and daughter could have better lives. So I'm not saying that, but the reality is that that's what our brain is urging us to do.
Yeah.
And we, in the modern world, if you try to become a dictator, you're going to have bad consequences in the other areas because it's not tolerated to be an alpha chimp in the modern world. So how can I please that inner mammal impulse to be important and special in the world as it is? And by the way, don't think the alpha's happy. They have a constant... First, they have the constant fear of losing their place, and they have more conflict. They invest more of their energy in conflict, and they die young. Okay? They die young, but with more babies. But none of us want that today.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was going to say, so in the modern world, one of the things we often talk about is sort of in our society, and I know you touched upon the fact that it's not just society, it's actually inherent in our sort of our genes, but the need to acquire, would the alpha male in the modern, you know, in the human community be the sort of financially stable one, the one who or the politically powerful ones,
Or the boss.
the boss?
So the I don't think so. And again, because that person is constantly living in fear of losing their spot. So I use the example of, like, if you are number 3 on the world's billionaire list, and then you fall to number 5, you may be miserable. And everybody else thinks, oh my God, he's got it going on. But he's just going nuts trying to keep his spot.
Yes.
I use the example of, what if you're a big shot lawyer? You spend your whole life sucking up to your clients, sucking up to your partner, the partners in your law firm, maybe sucking up to your young wife who's threatening to leave you and take everything. You know, so it's I don't go along with this idea that somebody else has it better, but that each of us is constantly challenged to what I call it, to choose between the specialness that makes you feel good and junk status. Okay? And only you could decide that for your particular brain. For example, if you learn to play the guitar when you were young and you feel really good about it, and if you get other people to listen to you play the guitar, maybe that makes you feel good. But if you try to be a rock star, your whole life would be about, things managers were telling you to do, and you know that rock stars never end up happy. So that's would be an example.
Yeah.
So
Go
here's
on.
the thing. When you talked about, well, we're really animals, but how are we different from animals? So animals only fear threats that are reaching their nose and their eyes and ears at that moment. They don't they don't they don't take precautions. And that's why they still lose their babies to lions, whereas we don't lose our babies to lions, because we anticipate threats and then we take precautions. But we can drive ourselves crazy because we are constantly anticipating threats. And as soon as we relieve one threat, we immediately go to anticipate the next threat.
Yeah.
So that's why in my books I focus on celebrating each time.
Exactly.
that
That's
you-
why it's a brilliant thing. That's what got us to this evolutionary point.
Yes.
It's
yes,
the fact that we've
exactly.
always been alert, and that's why we've gotten here.
Yeah.
But the problem
And
is that
that's-
if you don't realize that, because we practice mindfulness meditation, where it's a process where you observe your thoughts, and we notice that throughout the day, we have a series of very negative thoughts, like thinking about your boss, or thinking about problems in the past, or anticipating events in the future, and that continuous.
and comparing yourself to others.
Absolutely, the ego, anything ego related is because of the thoughts that we have. And a lot of the times the negative pain or the alertness or that worry that we feel is comparable to the gazelle looking out for her life, with is it the amygdala, that part of the brain that sends these responses. And
Yeah, so I was going to say, you were about to say something about celebrating the.
Oh, yeah. So that's the subject of my book, Beyond Cynical. So you would like to celebrate not just yourself when you make an accomplishment, but your society. But in fact, we're constantly told that our society is bad, and you may be telling yourself that your work is not good enough, because even though you just solved a problem, you imagine that other people have solved 10 times as many problems in the last hour as you have. So even though you're doing a good job, you have some unrealistic ideal in your head.
yeah, like I think Lord Richard Layard refers to the zero-sum game. The minute you start comparing yourself to someone, there's either you're going to feel good or you're going to feel bad, but either way they're kind of like false perceptions.
Yes, but the reason this happens constantly is because in the state of nature, if there's a piece of food that if you go for it and a bigger guy goes for it, you're going to get bitten or gored. So in the animal world, before you go for a bit of food, you look around and you see who's watching, and you don't go for it until you decide. Compare yourself to everyone around, and you decide, am I bigger than them or smaller than them? It sounds horrible, but like I said, there's 50 years of research on this, and everybody who spent time around animals knows this.
Yeah.
So that's why for ladies, comparing their handbag to the other lady's handbag, for example, is just works. Now, if we want to get past it, it's not so easy, because even if you stop doing it, the other people around you are doing it. So it's tough, but what I say is this is what allowed mammals to survive, because before there were mammals, reptiles were solitary. Reptiles never lived near other reptiles, because then they would kill each other over a bit of food. So this is actually a step forward when you realize the idea of it's really mammals having a sort of a hierarchy of strength. And what progressive researchers will tell you is they don't do this all the time, and they create these artificial laboratory examples of sharing. But 99.5% of the time, this is what goes on.
Okay. Do you do any form of meditation?
And that's a good question. Yeah, and I really don't know. So I don't do it sitting because I have some hip problems. And I know that that's very valued in the tradition to sit. But when I wake up in the morning, I don't get up. I don't jump up at any particular time. When I wake up, I lie in bed until I get up, and I don't intend to get up, but I just lie there and focus on relaxing my muscles. And then takes me a while, like a long time, and then suddenly I'm up and I don't even know how it happened. So I think maybe that's Vipassana. But frankly, I don't consider myself an example of anything because I had a lot of serious injuries when I was young, and I didn't know about it. And then in the past 10 years, when I've had the time to focus on unwinding my muscles, that's become a big priority for me. But my body may not be typical of anything.
Well, I guess two things for that. The first thing, as long as you're being in the present moment, and by focusing on the muscles in meditation, it's like we call it the body scan. Where you pay particular attention to certain parts of your body. So I guess that is a form of that present moment meditation. But I guess the reason why I asked is, we've been studying a bit of the science into meditation and what happens in the brain. And, and not only does it change neural pathways, but after 8 weeks of meditation, the amygdala actually shrinks in size. Not only the pathways, but physically the mass shrinks. And the frontal cortex, that actually grows, expands in mass. And just given the role of the amygdala and it's one of the earliest parts of the brain, right? I believe it's the reptilian, responsible for a lot of that fight or flight. But I guess hearing now that through meditation that part of the brain shrinks, what does that? What does that mean? Did that mean anything?
I'll tell you what it means for me.
Yeah.
Okay, and again, I don't know if my experience is not typical. So I grew up with a mother who was extremely stressed all the time. She grew up in very bad circumstances, and she was actually the sister who took care of her younger sisters. So she was successful at being hyper alert, but she had good reason to be alert. It wasn't just paranoia. But I had no source of comfort. My only interaction with her was unpleasant. So I sort of walled myself off from that. And today I'm considered not a nice girl because when girls hang around, they talk about how stressed and annoyed they are about everything. Men have their own way of doing it, I guess. And you're expected to agree. And that's why I have a lot of conflict about this, because the word empathy is said over and over and over. What does empathy mean if everyone around you is in a state of hyper stress and you are expected to join in that stress in order to be a good person? So, and then if you say, well, you don't need to create stress, then you're unempathetic because it's not our fault. My stress is the fault of my boss, my husband, my wife, da 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 da. So it's tough.
All right, so I went through your stuff, and I think I heard it on the other podcast as well. The scenario of I'm in traffic, and I get cut off. Now at that moment, negative thoughts rush into my mind, and then there's this almost an overwhelming anger that takes over. So, what is that an example of then in that moment?
Well, first, I think it's an example of myelinated pathways. So let's get back to that. It's very individual. For example, I don't care when someone cuts ahead of me in traffic, doesn't bother me a bit. So we each have the things that push our buttons.
Sure.
You know, you could tell me that my nails don't look nice. I don't care, you know, but I have other things that I care about. If you criticize me for being unempathetic, then that bothers me, you know. So we each have the thing that bothers us. And that's a myelinated pathway. That means that when you were young, you actually threatened by somebody who just always grabbed whatever was yours. And often it's a younger brother, older brother thing. Often it's a parent who had that attitude toward the world. And your parent got enraged when someone cut in front of them. So while there is this natural urge to compare yourself to others and to want to push ahead and get the next spot, on the other hand, to be annoyed when someone grabs that spot, which context turns it on in you depends on your myelinated pathways. So let me explain what that is. Myelin is a substance that it coats your neurons and turns them into superhighways. Like if you have a wire and you coat a wire with plastic, that wire becomes 20 times more efficient.
So it's like a
So
catalyst,
this neuron
the
gets
myelin.
coated with fat, literally. And that happens before age 8 and during puberty because that's when the brain produces lots of myelin. So anything that you myelinated in that time of life, electricity flows effortlessly. And that effortless flow of electricity is what we experience as the truth, you know? So you think it's true that I've been wronged because someone, you know, cut in front of me. Now, I'll tell you what causes that myelination is activation of a pathway. And when you're young, and what causes activation, it's either happy or unhappy. So a fascinating unhappy example is somebody else steals my cookie when I'm a kid. But a fascinating example for me about this driving, I got a speeding ticket twice. And if you get a third speeding ticket, you're in terrible trouble. So I trained myself. You know, the cortisol of getting a speeding ticket is really high. So I trained myself, nothing matters more than driving slow, you know? So I had to rewire myself. And one thing, I got one of the speeding tickets wiped off my record by taking a driving class. And by the way, I wasn't speeding a lot. I was in a residential zone. So when you drive just medium in a slow zone, you know, so just so you don't think I'm a nut.
I love the word medium. When you drive medium, it's like, how old are you? I'm medium. Yeah.
So anyway, I had to take a driving class. I take the driving class to get the speeding ticket wiped off my record. And what he told me is the driving teacher said he had to drive for 1 hour to get to teach us in the class in the morning because he came from somewhere else. And during that 1 hour, 6 times somebody cut in front of him. And each time someone cut in front of him, he slowed down and it cost him 30 seconds. So for those 6 times, it cost him 2 minutes. He said, I'm okay with those 2 minutes.
Right.
Great. But it's the paranoia about injustice that is triggered. And that's why, you know, in my book, Beyond Cynical, I talk on and on and on about this idea that in order to be socially acceptable these days, you have to be angry about injustice all the time. And it's just a herd behavior. It's not really healthy.
Okay. I guess one of the aspects that I wanted to touch upon is how with your teaching, how we can motivate us to be kinder to other people and to be more altruistic. Perhaps if you can speak a bit on that.
Okay, well, 2 things. One, to realize that everyone else is a mammal, and they haven't yet learned about their mammal brain the way you have, hopefully. And the second thing is to realize that it's good for you to be nice to people, but they're not always going to be nice back to you. So what do you do then? And so if you prepare yourself with a circuit to say, okay, I'm going to be nice to people because it's good for me, but what am I going to do when they're not nice back to me? And prepare myself so that I don't get triggered by it, because they're not going to be nice back to you. So I'll give you 2 very small examples. So I'll give you a small example and a big example. So let's start with the big example. So the big example is, I'm working really hard and I think I'm doing nice things at work, and then when there's time for a promotion, it goes to someone else. Okay? So that's something that a lot of people convince themselves, I'm so nice and everyone else is mean to me. Now, the problem with that is that you've created a preconceived deal. Like, here's the deal. If I do X, you must do Y. And if you don't do Y, then this great injustice has been committed. But really, I've created this deal in my own head. And that's why it's fascinating in these experiments with monkeys. They do different experiments where if we both reach for the banana at the same time, then we can get it. But, if I reach for the banana and I help you, and then you're going to steal the banana and not give it to me, then I'm not going to help you. So there's all different variations of this experiment that people do to prove whatever point they want to prove. But the bottom line is, I will be more relaxed if I tell myself that I can be nice now and expect something from you, but I may not get it, but then I may get something else at some other time when I'm not expecting it, so I don't need to keep score. And that's what I keep telling myself, you know what, I'm just not going to keep score. And in the past, there was religion, and people believed that God kept score so they didn't have to keep score. When people let go of religion, then they start keeping score. And then they're angry all the time, but they think they're nice. So that's a problem. So that's the big example with the raise. But now I'll give you a small example, which is really big. So when I was first learning about this, I did what a lot of people do. I'm going to be nice to clerks in stores. Okay? So every time I interact a clerk in a store, I'm going to look them in the eye and I'm going to smile. Now, a lot of people, they say, oh, that store, they were so mean to me. They weren't mean to you. It's just that when you look someone in the eye and smile at them and they don't do it back, it's like in me, it created actual terror. I felt like a terror. And I realized that it was me because when I looked at my mother, she didn't smile back. And so I had a terror circuit from eye contact. And again, it wasn't other people doing that to me. So I'm so glad I got to learn that. And I can celebrate that I've had this learning, but not everyone has had this learning. So when you look at them and smile, they may not smile back.
I really like the point that to understand that people are mammals just like us, and so therefore,
Yeah.
in a sense, you're more forgiving of people's flaws, and perhaps their treatment of you is not necessarily because of some say pre-planned, cooked up to sort of
Intentional,
just to upset you, but it's just how people are. And I think, and it helps with your own happiness in a sense, if you understand that. We keep saying, forgiveness.
And that word empathy earlier that you mentioned, I think that is a great source of it.
Yeah, because that understanding is true. We all have our flaws as people, as humans, and so, but the source of it is not necessarily even in their own control, in their own understanding. It's just a part of being the mammals that we are.
Yeah.
And just to go back to the example of the guy cutting me off, it's like sometimes I notice that I do that to other people as well. So I get furious about someone doing something that I do to someone else. You know, so it makes it makes zero sense.
Yeah.
And it holds
Well,
no ground.
you've both actually given examples of when someone reminds you of your own flaw, that's very upsetting. And so that's a sort of a topic for meditation, to be accepting about your own flaws. And it really helps to know that it's a myelinated circuit. Now, once you get to the step of then blaming your parents for your myelinated circuits, then you could forgive your parents. And again, a lot of your myelination comes from your teen years. You could blame your teachers and your peers, but the bottom line is they're struggling with their own myelinated circuits. So you can just say, you know what, all I can do is, again, to choose to be relaxed in each moment and to choose my next step.
And you mentioned that change in attitude, if you sustain that for at least 45 days, that is approximately the period required for you to establish new neural pathways and make that become the routine, if you like.
Yes, exactly. So it's interesting to think that, you know, when you were born, you had billions of neurons, but they were not connected to each other. And the connections that you built from the experiences of youth are where your electricity flows until you build new connections. But it's hard to build new connections later on. If you imagine that you're in the Amazon and you're trying to go through a jungle, each step you take, you have to work so hard to slash all that undergrowth. And after all that work, you've only taken one step, and you could have so easily gone on the paved road. And then if you do it and you go back the next day, that pathway is overgrown and it's just as hard again the next day. But if you slash the same pathway every day for 45 days, a pathway gets established, and now you can pass. Now that pathway will never be as big as the paved path that you myelinated when you were young, but it's big enough for your electricity to flow so that you can feel natural and normal with the new behavior.
All right. So who has been your biggest inspiration and why?
Well, first I mentioned David Attenborough, and I'll explain why. Well, as I said in the dedication to my book, he tells the truth about the conflict in nature, which many people are not doing anymore. And he just does it in a way that people don't realize how brilliant it is. It's not just the content of what he says, but I only realized 2 years ago, he's not just a talking head. He's the one that figured out how to capture the animal behavior on tape. He started in the 50s when it was life-threatening to take all the steps to get a camera to those places.
Like the Galapagos Islands and, you know, all those amazing places that he visited.
Yeah,
you know, when he was at university and when he was young at the BBC, you know.
Yes. And then over time, as it got easier to go to those places, he kept upping the technology so that we get better shots. So now you could get like the inside of an insect.
That's crazy.
Get it as it's like it's unbelievable the shots he gets. And so he has done so much for our understanding of life, and he makes it just beautiful and simple and fun. So everyone should watch everything he's ever done. And once you get hooked, you can go onto YouTube and get his stuff from the 50s and then go all the way up. And it's great. But I'll mention one other person who has been sort of an inspiration to me was a guy named Robert Ardrey. Robert Ardrey. He wrote, I have the book right there. I'm drawing a blank all of a sudden. But I'll just talk and it'll come to me. In the 1950s, I want to say out of Africa, but it's not out of Africa. African Genesis. It was when they started discovering that apes evolved into humans in Africa. And it's not a political statement, you know, it's just a matter of fossils. But the bottom line is that when these anthropologists and archaeologists brought him in to write popular books about this, he spent a lot of time with them, and he started realizing the state of animal conflict. And he was researching in the 50s and 60s when he had just come out of World War II, when people were trying to understand, why does this happen? When there was the Cold War. And again, the way we learn about the Cold War today was that America was aggressive. And we don't learn. I learned how to learn later on that what was going on in the Soviet Union, that they were killing millions of people, they were killing people in Eastern Europe, and they were aggressive. And that's like taboo. Now you're like shunned from the progressive world if you acknowledge that, which is okay because I have my own grass on another hill. But so he wrote about the conflict among monkeys and apes that we've evolved from. And everyone jumped on him, ridiculed him. And so whenever I felt unsafe to say what I was saying, I sort of took courage from that. When we talked about the myelination happening in puberty, I should really explain about that. So in the monkey world, nobody gives you food. After you get mother's milk, after that, forget it. If you don't get your own food, you starve. Mm-hmm. And in the beginning, you try to get your own food and you fail, but you're still nourished by mother's milk. Yeah. And I'm condensing, because people might criticize, but I'm condensing a long story. Yeah. But eventually you transition from your mother to your peer group. Yeah. And you must get along with your peer group to survive. So when we're adolescents, we are very much myelinated by whatever our peers do. Mm-hmm. Because if you're shunned by your peers, it feels like a survival threat. Even if your peers are doing bad things, and that's actually bad for your survival, because your mammal brain says, I must have this peer group in order to survive.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of the impoverished areas or the ghettos and stuff like that, you're almost, the chances of you coming out of there and doing something negative or illegal is very high, based on what you're saying. Evolutionary speaking, you want to imitate your environment.
Join a gang, basically.
Join a gang. Yes. Because you get all those rewards from, like you mentioned, from being with your peer group.
Yes.
Which ultimately leads you down a negative path, and it's a lose-lose kind of situation in those areas, because from what you're saying, and the science says, you put them in that environment, then they're going to come out and they're going to replicate the environment.
Yes, this is very meaningful to me because my ancestors come from Sicily, and specifically the part of Sicily where the mafia was grown, and everyone there grows up in that mafia culture. And then when they moved to New York, everyone from the same town in Sicily moved to the same places in New York. Yeah. And so I started researching all of this because I knew nothing about my ancestors and I knew nothing about my family. And I had no roots or sense of legacy. And I discovered, oh my God, this mafia lifestyle is awful. You have to go along or you'll get killed. And then I wondered, why didn't my parents turn out that way, as bad as their lives were? And I had to admit that it was because of the New York police and the New York legal system and courts. As much as in my world everyone attacks them, that the rule of law, that I give the UK credit for, the tradition of the rule of law is really what is protecting us. And no one likes to admit it because it's not cool. Like I told you about, why am I driving slow? Because I got a ticket. Everyone says, oh, I just want to be a good person. I like to violate the law because the legal system is bad, but I want to be a good person. Most people, if they have a chance to cheat, they do. Then they blame other people for cheating, and then they say everybody does it. So my other very formative experience, I got a degree in I got a degree in international relations, and I worked for the United Nations, and I went to Africa, and I wanted to help. And what I learned in 2 different assignments was that all the foreign aid money was being stolen, and all the foreign aid workers were looking the other way in order to protect their jobs. And I was so mad. And I could quit because I was 24 and I could still go into another career. But it was taboo to even talk about it. And I was so mad. And this whole idea that, I forgot how I started, but like everybody else is doing wrong, and so that makes it okay. Everybody will be that way, so I don't want to be a person who's being part of the problem.
Yeah. All right. Well, what's the profound message, I guess, you can, from what you've learned and from what you're teaching? They say teaching is the best way to learn. So I guess, on the deepest level, what would be your message?
My simple message is I can always feel good about my next step. Okay, so no matter where I am right now, I am so lucky to have the power to choose my next step. And I can always feel great about my next step. So no matter where I am, I could feel great 1 minute from now just by taking a step toward what I think will be better.
All right. So just remind our viewers and our listeners, if they want to find out a bit more about your work, maybe get in touch with you, where can they go? How can they find out more?
InnerMammalInstitute.org. InnerMammalInstitute.org. And I have lots and lots of resources. So I have a video, as you mentioned. I have a 5-day happy chemical jumpstart, which pops up when you go to the website. And that's 1 email a day that explains, for 5 days, that explains each of the happy chemicals and cortisol and all of this myelination thing. And I have infographics that make it all really simple. I have slideshows that make it pretty. And I have a contact form.
Okay, great. All right, so I'll put all that up on the podcast episode.
Great.
And yeah, we really hope that we can meet when you come over to the UK.
Great. Okay.
When is that again?
June?
June 1st through 16th.
Okay.
I'll be free during that time.
Yeah. Are you releasing any new material or publishing any books at around that time?
Oh, thank you so much for asking.
Yeah.
Yes, people have asked me to do a training program. So I'm doing that. And you can be a certified inner mammal trainer. It's all free for now.
Yeah.
The first level you can just do in a few minutes. Like you guys, now that you know all this stuff, you could do it in a few minutes. Yeah. So the first level is 20 questions, multiple choice, and then each level gets more complex after that. So you go to you could go to Inner Mammal Institute /training certification, or go to Inner Mammal Institute and then in the navigation choose free stuff. Okay, free stuff. And there's a huge list of free stuff, and at the bottom is the training program.
Wonderful.
So just before we go, I
Yes,
just wanted to ask, I'm always interested in people's opinion about social media, actually. And while it's a wonderful thing, we keep saying with all our guests, we're across the pond and we can speak to each other face to face. It's almost like we're in the same room. But to young people growing up, and I feel like they've got almost like a parallel identity. They've got their sort of face-to-face identity, and then they have their online, which we didn't have to face that problem. I didn't care which photos were released on Facebook or Instagram when I was growing up. It was sort of the here and now. It's more, us guys hanging out and, But I wonder if it's sort of doing more harm than good, or there increased pressure because it's so easy now that you can compare. Whereas before, maybe you'd have to meet up with someone to say you've got a better handbag, or got a better hairstyle or whatever. But now you can just pull out your phone to be reminded of how much better someone else's life is.
Yeah. Well, I think in every time period, all of this mammalian one-upmanship is going on with the technology of the day. So it's always been hard and frustrating to avoid the mammalian one-upmanship of the day. And so we have the choice to focus on the positive or the negative. So for example, if I'm around other people who are doing psychology, they could be constantly talking about the negative of social media. And I'm thinking, yeah, but look at all the good. And like, if you talk about the good, then they think you're not empathetic, you know? So I look at it is in your online presence, you get to be who you are every minute if you want. But then when you are who you are in every minute, then nobody may follow you. It's like, I'm going to just, but it's the same in real life. I don't care about you. I just want to be myself. Then, yeah, but then, you know, things may not work out. So you have to take some risks. And maybe people think it's easier to take risks in the online world. I don't know, but I think it's all the same thing. It's like, how much do I want to meet you halfway? Because I'm in my own little circuits and you're in your own little circuits, and I get a huge choice. And I think if I shop among 7 billion people in the world, I will find someone who's exactly like me, and I will never have to do any effort to get along with them. But it's not true. So hopefully as you mature, you say, you know what, I really have to meet people halfway.
All right. Okay, well on that note, Loretta, thank you very much, you know, for joining us and for the work that you're doing. It's really been, you know, inspirational for us. So, you know, we'll be in touch very soon.
Great, thank you. Look forward to being in touch. Bye-bye. This is great.